Peace and
Okay, I'm
love.
gonna just grab my food to go. And
Oh my God. Mute him.
Oh, yeah. Hey, brother Tyrone, you gotta meet, buddy. You gotta, help you out.
Peace and
okay, I'm
love.
gonna just grab my food to go. And,
Oh my. Okay, peace and love, family. How is everyone doing tonight? Thank you for joining us on another edition of RAM, Resurgence of the African Mind, where we seek to liberate African minds by reading one unit of work at a time. As you know, you guys, we're reading Powernomics by Dr. Claud Anderson. Last week, we read chapter 2, which was the keys to empowerment, which was part 1, I believe. And I think now we're into part 2, chapter 3, building competitive communities. My name is Lily Lapoete Speaks. Check out my blog at www.lilylapoetespeaks.com. That's LELELAPOETE speaks.com. You can find me at Facebook at Alima Njai. Thank you all for joining us. I am excited about reading this chapter and kicking it off with talking about neighborhoods versus communities and things like that. And we're going to let the panel introduce themselves. All right.
All right, peace and love, family. This is your sister, Dr. Maat. I am the co-founder and vice president of Ed Anime Productions. If you want to contact me, you can go to Facebook and just type in Dr. Maat, and my Facebook page should pop up. Also, check out Meltrek. That is a flagship project that we've been working on for about 4 or 5 years now. We're getting ready to drop episode 3, Sister Alima, and I'm so excited about that. We're going to be teaching children about the origins of the transatlantic slave trade. So essentially, we're going to be focusing on Portuguese exploration and that whole European discovery and how they made their way into Africa, starting in Northern Africa first. So I'm excited about that. So if you want to teach your children accurate history of African people, just go to your Google search engine, type in Meltrek, and links to purchase the Meltrek program will populate. I'm excited, sis, also about reading, discussing this particular chapter. You and I talk about this all the time, building Black communities. And you and I have said for quite some time that Black people don't have Black communities. That's why when they kind of throw that thing out there, Black communities, what is the Black community?
Correct.
Essentially, we have Black neighborhoods,
yes.
Black residential areas, but we don't have a Black community. And so we'll get more into what a Black community, what a functioning Black community should look like while we're discussing chapter 3. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass the mic. Brother Tyrone, I know you're out and about. Do you want to introduce yourself, or do you want me to keep you on mute?
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, so my name is Tyrone Edmond. I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm currently living abroad in Italy right now. And I actually went on the Ghana trip last year with Dr. Maat to with Bomani Tayimba. So in my travels, not just here in Italy, I get to experience a lot of the African communities, and also other Black people from abroad. And I get to talk with them, and they can tell me about their experiences. And it's just I have a lot of observations, and they tell me things about their experiences, and it's really interesting. So I feel that it's my responsibility to warn other people that's trying to come abroad, and also to get into their minds, like what are they thinking, and to understand why are they going to these different places? Why are they not going back home to build and stuff like that?
Wow.
Okay. Oh yeah, and I enjoyed it too. He's right. We were on Brother Bomani had a trip last year. That's where I first met Brother Tyrone, and we had a ball in Ghana. We were over there for about, I'd say 12 days. It was a 14-day trip, but already, Sister Alima, you spend like a whole day just getting there and a day returning. So, it was really like a 12 days in Ghana. And we had an absolute ball. And Brother Tyrone and I, we actually explored the Elmina Castle together. The group wanted to go on a canopy trip, and he and I was just like, what? We can do that in the States.
Right.
Let's go tour, Elmina. And he and I spent the day together. at the Elmina Castle and the Dutch fort that was built behind the castle. So he and I actually spent like one day together and had an absolute ball.
Nice.
But yeah, so Brother Tyrone, I'm happy you're on the panel, and I got to get out there to Italy one day, brother, to I've never been to Italy, but I would love to come out there and visit you one day. I know you told me.
Sure, no problem. I got room.
I'll be there. I'll definitely be there. So let's kick it off, Sister Alima, with building competitive communities.
All right. Where are we? Chapter 3.
Yes.
When he starts it off, it's a little quote here in italicized. It says, "This nation will be colorblind when whites proclaim their black blood like they proclaim Indian and European lineage." I said, whew, have you know? That is not gonna happen. Okay, but it made me laugh, and I saw that. I said, he funny, he crazy, whoever said that. But okay, so we kick it off. He says, Black Americans must therefore build functional communities within which they can ethno-aggregate, as we learned in chapter 2, and then practice group economics and group politics. A functional community can best be defined as a grouping of people who come together and organize for their own self-interest rather than misdirected altruistic interests. So as you stated earlier, you know, they often say, we hear all the time, sis, the Black community, the Black community. It's like you stated, what community though? Where do we have places where we've ethno-aggregated our funds and economics and resources and can say that we own the businesses and, you know, we own the property and this is our town?
Exactly. And since we haven't had that in quite a long time.
Yes.
We had it during segregation, but we haven't, ever since we integrated, we haven't had any type of Black community whatsoever. And so I agree with you 100%. We just don't have it. It is what it is. And even when I just think about the word itself, community, calm with and in unity, yes, with unity, we don't have that. And so, you know, again, you and I talk about this all the time. And you know, and sis, I understand why we don't have it, but it's kind of sad, you know, when you look around and you see what other groups of people doing. And I know that I remember Knowledge Born and I were having a discussion, and he's like, Dr. Maat, you know, it's not good to compare yourself to other groups of people. And I said, but you can't help it to say, okay, if this group of people can do it, so can we. And I understand that this group of people may not have the issues that we have. They may be functioning with a different psychology due to their different historical experiences.
Correct.
But however, I'm not one to think that someone else can do something and I can't do it. I don't have like an inferiority complex.
Exactly.
So I feel like if they can do it, so can we. If the Koreans can pull together their resources and build, you know, economical and political and social viable communities, so can we. If the Arabs can do it, so can we. If the Indians can do it, and if they can do it, the Jewish people can do it, so can we. Now, we may be working with less resources than some of these other groups, but I still feel like, sis, if they can do it, so can we.
That's right. And actually, we all know that on a collective level, though, even if we're not talking about all of us, but just small groups of us in batches, like everyone knows that a lot of us, we have money because we fuel a lot of economies with our spending habits. So it's not that we don't have it, it's just the way that we spend it. So if we could change our mindsets in the way in which we spend the money that we actually do have, we could see just how much resources we have amongst us that we don't realize that we just give away to everyone else's community.
That's a fact. Like you said, we have to change our mindset. Brother Tyrone, you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say. So, as the community thing, now I know that back in the day we used to have, communities. It's more so before the civil rights movement, and we were more together then. I know this, before the whole the integration thing. Yes. Thank you. But also, I think what really happened is we felt that we got success and we felt that we arrived. And when that happens, usually you think you're finished and you lose sight of the goal. But of course, we didn't arrive at that place. We were deceived.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? So that and us having a lot of success, I think that really added to it because, success it blinds you.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So, and I noticed that a lot of people they're more cold toward each other. They don't have that community mindset like you said. So, like the true Africans do, or many people in the Caribbean. You know what I'm saying?
I think that our definition of success was bad from the jump. You said we found success or what we thought success was. I instantly thought about the baby boomers. And I was having a conversation with my mother maybe a few weeks ago. And I said, Ma, I feel like, and I'm not blaming the baby boomers for all of the things that's wrong with, the Black community, but I think they played a hell of a role, man. I mean, in where we are right now. And I was telling her that the baby boomers, to me, they were the generation that I felt that could have really changed things. They were like the first generation that was highly educated. A lot of them went to college. And as soon as they went to college and they got good jobs, the cities became no longer good enough for them to live in. It was kind of like, look, I'm going to go to the suburbs. I'm going to live with white folks. And they abandoned the city. They abandoned them. They left out a lot of professionals, doctors, lawyers, and even teachers. They left the city and went to the suburbs because of our definition of success. And our definition was white acceptance, white validation, white praise, just totally assimilating to European culture. That was our definition of success. And I think that definition of success, it has adversely affected the Black community. And I always tell my mom when we have these conversations, I said, man, the baby boomers really did us in, with that whole drive to integrate into, and abandoning the cities, So I kind of blame a lot of this on the baby boomers. What do you guys think?
I don't want to use the term blame because it may come off as offensive.
Yeah.
However, whatever the more kinder term is, whatever that is, yes. Okay, so I agree because for whatever reason, I'm not certain why. I don't know what it is that they felt that they needed from them that they didn't have already, that they had created themselves. And if only they could have just stayed strong and just said, you know what, we're good over here. Just if only, just like where would things be today? You know what I mean? Like what would we have today? I don't know. I don't know, sis.
Yeah. And so I like also in the chapter where he talks about building physical communities, because when people say like, and I thought about the conscious community, the conscious community isn't a physical community. We keep saying the conscious community, and I'm like, where?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, where is this conscious community that we're talking about? It's not a physical community, and we have to actually build, to me, a physical conscious community. And what I mean by that is like-minded, African-centered people coming together, building institutions and businesses and operating in our self-interest.
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And
you know where it would probably, where I'm thinking though, I was thinking logistically, and I was thinking if we wanted to start a community, where would be a good place? And it definitely wouldn't be a lot of this. I don't think the states that are the most heavily populated, which is where most of the people in the country would be, it would be a good idea. I was thinking possibly states that actually want people and are looking for people to move to their state, where people wouldn't necessarily want to live at, like maybe in the Midwest or something like that. What do you think as far as location wise, as far as Baba talking about building an actual location, where do you think here in America would be a good place?
Yeah, like you said, Midwest, like you said, places where people don't typically go. South Carolina.
South Carolina?
What did you say, sis?
You think South Carolina?
I just think the reason why I say South Carolina, when I go down there to places like Sumter County, well, my family's from Sumter County, it's a lot of acres of land for sale. down there. And I'm not talking about like near Myrtle Beach. I'm not saying like, I'm not talking about Myrtle Beach area. I'm talking about like Sumter County, Florence, where it's very rural, where no one wants to go.
I'm thinking states that don't have a deep history in slavery. Or association vicariously with slavery.
I got
those states, like let's, maybe
you want to stay away from those states. Texas.
Let's stay away from them.
Texas, South Carolina.
People that might come and try to bomb some shit, like, maybe not them.
I got you, Queen. But that's what I was thinking about, like places, because nobody's relocating to South Carolina. Like nobody's doing that. So that's what I was thinking, like very rural areas. So I was thinking
we jumped the gun a little bit, and because Baba does start to get into talking about what Brother Tyrone was saying. He does get into that a little bit further. But let's get back into the book, sis, because how they'll do. What they'll do.
But let me tell you this, though. Let me say this. I'm looking at the top of page 65. All right. And he said that it takes a fully functional community to raise a child and to raise up a competitive race of people. And that's a fact.
That's a fact.
And the key word there is functional.
Functional, yes.
Not
I circle that, sis.
Me too. That's a fact, though. It has to be a functional community, because right now we're raising our babies in a lot of dysfunction.
Correct.
Yeah, a lot of dysfunction. So we have a dysfunctional neighborhoods or residential areas raising children in turn. So we're raising dysfunctional children who are not fully reaching children who aren't reaching their fullest potential because they're being reared in dysfunctional communities instead of functional communities.
Right.
So we actually circled that too.
Tyrone?
Yeah, I was actually gonna comment about the functional part because us in America, we're conditioned, we're psychologically damaged. So it's a result of all of that over time, and then it finally started showing in the past couple of generations. But we have to make the willful choice to want the medicine that would heal us. And I noticed that a lot of us don't. We like drama. A lot of us like drama. We feed off of it. So it's going to be really difficult to sell that to people when they have that mentality. And I'd say we shouldn't try. We should definitely try. You know what I'm saying? So
I'm sorry. I'm about to cut that.
No, go ahead.
I'm agreeing with you, brother. I agree, because you know what? I wanted to backtrack on, I feel like it was either Brother You or maybe it was Brother Tuola. The last time we were talking, and he was saying that it could be a small community, and maybe I wasn't so certain, but I think that he's right, because the way that we operate is like, if we see a small group start popping, then we'll want to be a part of it. So I feel like if it was a small community to start with and they really, really grew, then a lot of Black people would want to be a part of it. And they could only be a part of it, of course, because that would be a community with actual guidelines and code of conduct, which we'll get into. They would have to be able to abide by those things. So it could be possible.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because people go, the bandwagon effects.
Right.
Yeah, the bandwagon effect. So like you said, if they see a bunch of people, or at least a small population of people doing it and thriving, oh, I want to try that too. The bandwagon effect. Absolutely. So he goes on to say that most of Black Americans live in neighborhoods. We said that, not communities. And he says that a community signifies commitment and the potential for power. A neighborhood does not. Right. And then he gets into the definition of a neighborhood. Right. And he says that the concept of a neighborhood implies an area that is residential in nature with lesser wealth, power, and status than a community. The majority of Black Americans live in impoverished Black neighborhoods and spend approximately 95% of their annual disposable income with people who live outside of the neighborhood. That's a fact.
That's a fact.
Yeah. And then he goes on, Queen, to say that during Jim Crow segregation, we didn't live in communities. He called them quasi communities. So they were somewhat community-like, but more community than we have right now.
Right.
Definitely more. So then he gets into the need for developing a true sense of community. And he said that is collective thinking, seeing and behaving as we instead of me. And so last week, Queen, we talked about individualism.
Correct.
That's in the disease of individualism that exists within the, I'm going to say, quote unquote, Black community. But in order for us to even have a sense of community, we have to rid ourselves of that disease of individualism. And we have it and we have that disease because of social engineering. He goes on to discuss that also. Yeah. And then look, sis, when he mentioned social engineering, he talked about Willie Lynch. I knew it was coming.
I knew it was going to come up. It always does.
It always come up.
Never fails.
He said he called it Willie Lynchism.
Lynchism.
Yeah, he said that, that is social engineering that effectively destroyed the Black community. He called it Willie Lynchism. And remember that became popular, sis, back in the 90s, where, remember Farrakhan read the letter, Willie Lynch letter. And then years later, we found out that Willie Lynch never existed.
Never existed.
Yeah, never existed, and they were saying it was a letter where he was going around and teaching slave masters how to control, their slaves through these different principles. And we found out that it wasn't a real person. But I always tell people, even though it wasn't a real person, it's definitely a myth, and it's a myth myths teach lessons. And I think the lesson in that is that we shouldn't allow people to separate us, based on age and gender and complexion and where you live and things of that nature. So I think that's what they were trying to get across. But they did lie, sis, by saying that Willie Lynch was talking about Willie Lynch as if Willie Lynch was a real person. But I do understand the point of the myth.
Right.
I definitely understood the point of the myth.
68. Where are we at now, Queen? Are we at 68?
Yep, page 68, Meritorious Manumission. And
I like this chart right here that Baba had, the Meritorious Manumission versus brainwashing, sis, because the way I like how he broke it down, and I like this comparison here. If you would like, should we read the table?
Go ahead, Queen, read that. I think that was powerful.
Okay, so chapter 3 here, table 2, family, is called Meritorious Manumission versus communist brainwashing. And so he's basically showing the comparisons of what he also, meritorious manumission, he also relays that to the Willie Lynchism versus what the communists did. And so the time period would be for the Willie Lynchism would be 1710 to the 1860s. And for the communist POW brainwashing was the 1950 through 1954. So the subjects of Willie Lynchism, nearly 15 million African slaves on plantations throughout the Americas. The subjects in the communist brainwashing, nearly 7,000 white American soldiers in POW camps in North Korea. The goal with the Willie Lynchism, to control a large group of captured slaves and make them hardworking, fearful, dependent, docile, submissive, and loyal labor tools to build wealth for their captors. Goal for the communists, to control a large group of captured POWs using minimum resources, make them non-combative, dependent, and compliant to be used as propaganda tools. Program Willie Lynchism, a system of dehumanizing and physiological conditioning using elementary principles of physical, emotional, and intellectual deprivation, conducted by slave masters with the equivalent of 3rd to 4th grade education. Program Communists, a system of re-education and indoctrination using fundamental principles of psychology in a perverted way, conducted by communists with master's degrees in social sciences. Procedure, Lynchism, transported into hostile lands, made a minority and totally dependent, totally deprived of family, hope, and basic necessities, rewarded for identifying with slave master. Procedure, Communists, transported into North Korea, isolated from support systems, subjected to various forms of deprivation with rewards and punishment, divided by military rank. Reactions of enslaved Blacks, internalized white values and fear of oppressors, eroded group self-interest and abandoned code of conduct, displayed self-hate, exhibited difficulty trusting and cooperating with other Blacks. Reaction of prisoners, acquiesced and colluded with captors, compromised on principles, became individualistic, selfish, and withdrawn, abandoned the code of conduct, unable to organize and trust, built mental prisons within their own minds. Success rate, Willie Lynchism. After 360 years, 36 million descendants of slaves have the shortest life expectancy, low self-esteem, remain divided and non-competitive. They remain fearful and continue to seek white approval and rewards that come with being Sambos and sellouts. Success rate of the POWs, only 2,000 of the original 7,000 American POWs survived. Most POW camps had no guards or fences, yet not one American POW escaped in an organized attempt. Survivors remained withdrawn. POWs became turncoats against their own country.
So sis, basically, like after you read that, right? And I read it, and then you reading it and just listening to it again. He's basically saying that Black people were brainwashed, no different than POWs who
Facts.
were brainwashed, you know. And when I thought about that, they said that most of us are African POWs anyway. And so it was just wild him making that analogy. You know what I mean? That
It was.
Yeah, that the conditioning, he's saying that the conditioning and control techniques that they use to control us and to psychologically condition us are essentially it had the same effect as a POW being brainwashed. But that's what we are, Queen. A lot of us are POWs, you know, and then we've been brainwashed by slavery. And
what stood out though, Queen, before we go to page 70, it was the last two sentences at the bottom of 68. The brainwashed POWs who survived were hospitalized and deprogrammed. No such therapy has ever been offered to the Black Americans.
Not at all. Not at all. And so whenever you and I were talking a while ago about healing, and we were saying that we keep talking about nation building, and we have this desire to nation build, but we can't nation build with sick people. A lot of people are sick, and you and I talk about it all the time. We say, man, we need healing.
We need healing.
Like you said, since that healing, that therapy has never been offered and taken place collectively.
Right.
Now, some of us have, you know, some of us go to therapists and some of us understand the issues that we have and we want to heal, but collectively, we never had that healing. Brother Tyrone?
Yes, I have actually a lot to say about that. I've actually made that observation before, and I'm ecstatic that you came to that conclusion. So, you know, I'm in the military, and we learn about military operations from, you know, from the U.S. and from other countries as well. And one of the things that, you know, POWs go through is it's like this cycle, this psychological cycle. Once you get captured, you know, they break you down, you get brainwashed, they mess with you, they play the good cop, bad cop. It just continues over and over and over again. And this is how they break people down. So that what you're saying is actually really true. It's very true. And it's if you don't receive the right you know, therapy, you're going to continue that cycle, and you know, you're just going to be a broken person. But you're right. So just like when people from America, you know, American military, they go back, we have a period of a couple weeks or maybe even months where they like relax, and we don't really go to work very much, and they actually have counselors for us, and we sit down and we talk, and you know, we talk about our experiences and our feelings and our emotions, just to sort of get us back into that mindset, you know, before we head back into normal society with our wives and children and stuff like that. So what you're saying is very true. That never happened for us, even during Reconstruction.
Right. Like you said, it never happened. And sis, I had that highlighted in my book myself. So I'm glad you brought that out. Matter of fact,
that was powerful to me, and it stuck out. You know what I'm saying? Like I needed to hear it, because, you know, sometimes I just don't ever want to be too hard on my people.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, we've been through a lot, and like we said, never received healing from it. So what do you think the results is gonna look like? This is what it's gonna look like.
That's a fact. That's a fact. And I know we get frustrated, but I get frustrated. I call you, you call me, we like, girl, you know. But like you said, we got to recognize that our people are very broken. We are very broken people. It's not excusing the behavior. It's just calling it what it is. Right. We are very broken people, and then we do definitely need to heal. Definitely need to heal. I said, I said one time on Facebook one day, I posted that that churches need to be replaced with African-centered mental health clinics. And people were upset with me. Like, what? How could you say something like that? How could you say that's what we need, family?
Of course.
Yeah, they were upset with me when I put that up there. I said all churches should be replaced with African-centered mental health clinics because we are definitely in need of mental healing. So I don't understand how we can nation build with a bunch of sick people. Like you said, we have to start off very small with a small group of people, and that group of people would become like, I guess, the model community, and we would try to duplicate the model community.
Okay.
Let's go. Brainwash for Life, page 70. There were a few things, Queen, that stood out to me. You know, he was talking about, of course, more about the Willie Lynch, the POWs, and how they became dependent on their captors and they became grateful for little things. But at the bottom of 70, he says about slavery. And I was like, okay, so he says only a few thousand of more than 5 million slaves ever attempted an escape. Out of 252 known slave revolts, a Black informed nearly every time. Ironically, on the eve of the Civil War, over 6,000 Blacks were slave holders. But what stood out to me the most was he said that shows you the conditioning, that only a few thousand out of millions tried to escape.
Yep. That I thought about Harriet Tubman when she said, I could have freed, 1,000 slaves. I only freed a couple hundred, could have freed 1,000 if only they knew that they were slaves. So that, like you said, sis, it just shows you how deep, the brainwashing and conditioning was.
Exactly.
I sit back and look at, I look at, of course, documentaries on slavery. I read a lot of narratives and journals on slavery. And I sit there and I think, you had maybe 100 people on a plantation and then the slave master and his family, and you all didn't think that you can go in there and kill those people.
Right.
So it just shows you, like you said, how much we were how brainwashed we were.
Yes.
And I remember, I don't know who said it, Queen, but someone said that the Africans who got on the boat were not the same Africans who came off the boat. So they were saying that when we came over, through Middle Passage, and some of us were dropped off in the Caribbean, and then we went to somewhere in America. I think only 10% of the Africans taken from the continent were taken into America, 10 or 15%. The rest were sent over into the Caribbean. But they said that we weren't the same people when we got off those boats.
Right.
We were not the same people.
Could you imagine just being in a strange land? You know what I mean? Like, you don't understand the language. Like, I just couldn't imagine what that was like psychologically, what that's like. You know what I mean? I just couldn't imagine, sis.
And then look, sis, moving on, he says social integration is disintegration. It's disintegration. And so he goes on to talk about how integration has, it destroyed our group solidarity.
That's right.
And it forced us, it says it reinforced the practice, and it destroyed our Black quasi communities and even our sense of communities when we integrated. And he goes on to say that we now own and control less than we did in 1954 before the integration progress began. We gave up our businesses, our educational institutions, political leadership, culture, quasi communities. He says, by comparison, approximately 90% of all Asians and Arabs and Hispanics in America, they immigrated within the last 30 years. It says, following the end of the Black civil rights movement, and have economically surpassed us. So like you said earlier, Queen, what would have happened if we would have stayed in our own quasi communities and developed our own communities? And I know you said blame, and blame could be a word that could be taken offensive, but
but I know what you meant.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to, I don't want to offend anybody that's a baby boomer who may be listening, but it's just kind of like you said, what if we just stayed and just developed what we had? Where would we be? And now he's talking about how, once we did integrate, how it says that the majority society consented to integrate Blacks. It says whites began a scorched earth policy, intentionally destroying large urban cities. And he's talked about how they started building highways through, Black communities and things of that nature. So Yeah. And then the last thing I want to point out, sis, on page 71, is that he said integration has a built-in unofficial quota system of 5 to 8%, sometimes called the tipping point, to ensure that Blacks will always be powerless, will be a powerless, non-controlling minority in white communities, businesses, schools, and public offices. And sis, that is so
true.
They'll let a few of us in.
Just a few.
Yeah, they'll let a few of us in, but they won't let the majority of us in.
Just enough to say they're not racist.
Exactly. And I see it all the time.
Exactly.
I see it all the time at Morgan. A lot of these corporations, they'll come in, they recruit our students to say, oh, our company is diverse. We have, 3% or 5% African Americans who work for us. So it's like you're being used just to say that, for quota purposes.
Exactly. And then like they get write-offs and stuff like that for meeting those quotas. I mean, so there's incentives in it for them on top of that, just for giving you a job.
Yep, absolutely. So he says I'm on the top of page 72, he says, typically, there's a situation where whites are always the majority and Blacks are the minority as described. So that's racial balance to them, where they're the majority and we are the minority. They consider that balance, and clearly it's not. So at the bottom, he presents a table entitled Categories of Competitiveness, and he lists the different groups of people who are strongly individualistic. And those group of people are European, but we also in the same category because we have Black skin, but we function with white minds, right? So essentially we act like them. So they're strongly individualistic, and so are we. But if you look at the table on the right side, the second column, the strongly group-oriented people are the Japanese, the Chinese, other Asian nations, Arabs, Middle East nations, and Latin American and Hispanics. They are very strongly group-oriented people. So we should be on the right side of the column, but we're on the left side of the column due to social engineering and social integration.
Correct.
And I have a star right here. I think this is like right before we get to the elements of functional communities.
Okay.
Dr. Amos Wilson says that Black American will continue to suffer a double loss, losing out to groups identified in both columns 1 and 2, as long as there's a gap between our ideology and the reality of our predicament. And we are, sis, like the ideology that we have does nothing to get us out of the condition that we're in. You get what I'm saying? And so as long as we adhere to or subscribe to an ideology that does not advance us, we're going to continue to be in this condition, or our condition will worsen. So I thought about that when I read that line.
Okay, so elements of functional communities. That's where we are, right, Queen?
Yep.
All right, so he said now he wanted to identify some major menaces and impediments to building Black communities. And he was saying that we'll begin with the design of the communities. The design for physical and human communities can reverse effects of century social conditioning. He's saying this is what they're going to present. So the first thing we must do is convert residential neighborhoods into functioning communities that contain 3 key elements. First, they should have an independent economy that is wholly owned by residents of the community and provides consumer products, services, businesses, and employment opportunities. Very important. Second, they should have an active code of conduct and group accountability. Third, they should have a form of governance that collectively speaks for the residents and is capable of applying political pressure to outside groups, which of course we learned this as well, in our earlier readings, but I agree with all this. What do you think, Queen?
I agree 100% with it. So he's basically saying we need economic engines in our community, right? We need economic engines. And then we also need a code of conduct. And you and I, we talk about that all the time, code of conduct and accountability, in governance. So like you said, in our readings, in my mind went right back to Blueprint for Black Power, But I was reading this, I was like, yep, definitely economic engines, yep, definitely a code of conduct, and definitely, governance. And I definitely, I want to touch on the code of conduct.
Yeah.
Good behavior will be behavior that advances us, and that is behavior that should be rewarded, right? And then bad behavior should be categorized as any type of behavior that disempowers us or derails us from our collective vision. And that behavior should be, punished. You should be punished for that type of behavior. I know that there's a DVD floating around. I didn't have an opportunity to check it out yet, called The Melanin Code. I know Tariq Nasheed and a few other people were on it, just talking about how they're arguing for a code of conduct. They're like, we need to have a code, no matter where you are, in the US, all Black people abide by this code. And we used to have a code, Sister Alima. Back in the day, it was certain things that Black people did, and it was certain things that Black people did not. But again, because of social engineering and social integration, you really can't distinguish Black behavior from white behavior at this point.
Not anymore.
And I'm gonna tell you what the tipping point was for me. I remember in the 90s. Do you remember it was a guy going around killing people? And we all, I forgot his name.
One of them name was Malvo. I can't remember I think the young boy's name was Malvo, but I can't remember. He was like Jamaican, the young dude. It was like 17 or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was his son.
Dude. It wasn't his son. I remember that though.
Okay, yeah, and so I remember before they caught him, everyone in the Black community said, "Oh, he's white." We just knew it. White folks. And then when they finally caught the guy, he was Black.
Yeah.
And so we were sitting there. I was shocked because I just knew that they were going to catch a white person, but this was a Black guy.
Yes,
they had a young Black dude with them running around killing people. So again, we're at a point where we cannot distinguish our behavior from their behavior because we've just totally assimilated to ways. I remember W.E.B. Du Bois, he talked about double consciousness and how, remember in the book Souls of Black Folk, he argued that we have a double consciousness or a dual consciousness. Frantz Fanon, in his books, he talked about a dual consciousness and a double consciousness. And even Baba Amos Wilson, in his book, The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child, he was saying that Black people operate with a double consciousness, but that's not true anymore to me, sis. I think I think that we've become them. We've become them. And I think that the only way that we can regain our Africanity is by extricating ourselves from their culture and regaining our African consciousness. Yeah, I think that that's the only way. What do you think, Queen?
I agree with that, sis, because you can see, as I call it, this fake sense of unity, but stop saying that. It's not necessarily a fake sense of unity I'm seeing, but it's more so like a collective thought process, right? So it's like I see certain things to where certain things will bother us, and as a collective, we're all upset, or as a collective, we all get involved like on a massive level. So that tells me that we still have some certain similarities that we all share that separates us from them. But we would, like you said, exclusively need to be separated from them in order to fully, fully reach the potential to whatever we still have left that ties us together before it's all gone. So I see it, the potential, but we've integrated so much that, like you said, we would have to be separated, sis, or elsewise we're going to be fully encapsulated into them and won't be able to recognize ourselves whatsoever from them.
And then he talks about an independent economy, and how we need to become a more production oriented people rather than a consumption oriented people. Because right now we're the biggest consumers. Arabs and Asians, they know that when they come to the United States, if they want to enrich themselves, they know that they can do it by coming to the Black community, because they know that we're not discriminate about how we spend our money.
Right.
And so they know, okay, we go there, we set up a business. Black people are going to support us, especially if it's a need that we have in the community. Dry cleaners, they come there, they set up dry cleaners. It may not be a store in the Black community, so they'll open up like a convenience store, like a mom and pop shop right there in the Black community. So they know where to come to, Queen. And so what we need to do is, okay, what are the needs of our community? Okay, let me create a business that satisfies, those needs, and not even just needs, wants too. Getting our nails done, getting our hair done, things like that, sis. And we need to start taking over those industries. And we are. I have been seeing a lot of progress online. I know some sisters are opening up beauty supply stores. There are sisters opening nail shops and beauty supply stores and stuff like that. So I'm just hoping that we keep on pushing, in that direction.
The issue that we're going to have with that, Queen, is that if we want to really set up communities, then we're going to want to try to clean up our communities. And selling alcohol and cigarettes would be a problem if, you know what I'm saying? Like, if, say, for instance, like all these convenience marts that are located in the local hoods everywhere, they're typically owned by like maybe an Arab or an Asian or something like that. But we know they sell loose cigarettes, stuff like that, sis. They let people sell their drugs up out of there. So that's also a big element within the community, to the point that we see it in movies, you know what I mean, in music videos and things like that. So that would be another thing that we have to combat, is our drug usage and things like that we try to use to suppress the pain, even though we say it's just turning up or whatever, but it's actually deeper than that.
Oh yeah, I agree 100% with you, Queen. I agree 100% with you. And that will go back to, I guess, what, the code of conduct, right?
Correct.
Yeah, definitely go back to that. Brother Tyrone, do you, she was speaking and it was echoing, so I put you on mute, but did you want to add something?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to go back to the part about the quasi unity, like that we kind of have. I noticed we come together when it comes to social events, but when it comes to like being serious with business or things like that, usually we tend to like want to go to white establishments. Yeah, so I'm not sure what it is, why we don't want to deal with each other on a serious level. Is it because of mentality? Is it because, people have certain ethics, the work ethics that's not desirable? Well, that's something we're gonna have to fix. We got to put in the work for that. There's no getting around it. So I'm not sure what it is particularly, but that's what I've noticed so far.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Like we'll kick it and BS with each other, but when it comes to like business or wanting to do something serious, like basically a lot of times when it comes to your money and spending your money, and say, okay, we can talk about this community all day long, right? And say we have 10,000 people on board, and then it's like, all right, let's put the money up. We might have 500 left. Y'all know that's the truth. Like it's I'm echoing what he's saying. Like it's true. It's hard. It's easy to get a bunch of Black people together to talk about something, and you can put it in writing and all of that. But when it's time to put the bread up, a lot of people have a hard time, because then all of a sudden we don't trust each other. But what if this happens, and what if that happens? But you'll go down there and give the white man $30,000 check for a house or something like that. Like it's nothing. You don't know him either.
Yep, you don't know him either. But they say money follows your values. So yeah, absolutely. When it's time to do it, like you said, you might have a handful of folks who will really commit to doing it.
That's it.
Yeah. And like you said the key word, sis, trust. And I know that Baba gets into that at the end of the chapter, that lack of group trust that we have, and then, so we need to cultivate that, and I don't even want to get into the rest of what he said, but definitely, like you said, that trust. We don't trust each other. And that stems from, to me, self-hate. I'm not saying only self-hate, but self-hate is definitely a factor. Self-hate, having an inferiority complex, because some Black folks will look at you when you tell them you have a vision and you want to do something, it'll be another Black person they'll be the first people to tell you you can't do it.
Mhm.
You know, you can't do that. Oh, Sister Lima, you dreaming too big. You can't do, because they're operating with a, inferiority complex or a self-defeat, a self-defeating mentality. So yeah, that group trust, we don't have it. So like you said, when it's time to do it, then it's kind of like, no, I'm not going to put my money up because I really don't trust you, and I don't trust in the vision that you're promoting, or that I don't trust you, because if I did, I would give you my money. But this is, let me say this too. We have had Black folks who rose up with ideas and vision, and Black folks would support them, and then they would just misappropriate the funds.
Girl, ooh, you
I
read
think,
mine.
yeah, I think so. I think that Black folks, or we just at a point where we there is a lot of mistrust, because, and I don't want to call out any names, but I think you know who I'm talking about, who raised almost $1 million for a school, and then come to find out they never got to school. And so it's kind of like situations like that, to me.
We personally been scammed. You know that situation. So
Yeah.
I know how people feel. Like you don't want to do business with people.
Yep.
Worked hard for all this money, and like we don't have no silver spoon. So if we have some money that we don't save up or whatever, that's what it is.
Absolutely.
Millions and millions in the stash or something like that. Like a lot of us can't even bounce back from stuff like that.
Yep, absolutely. And so I think that behavior also promotes mistrust in the
It does. Yes, it does.
Black community. Absolutely, absolutely. So the last element.
Nationalism.
Yep.
I talked.
Oh, we didn't touch on social and political governance.
Oh no, we didn't.
We didn't touch on that one, and we can move into nationalism and pluralism. I think actually he ends with this particular section, right? Sort of, kind of,
Sort of, not really.
Kind of, sort of, not really. Okay, so social and political governance. He says all across America, Black neighborhoods are administered and governed by whites. Even in cities where Black elected officials are already in place, whites set the rules. So essentially, in a lot of Black urban places, we may have Black politicians, but it's just Black faces in the white power structure. They don't have any power. They don't make the rules. They don't set the rules, right? Whites still set the rules, even though we have Black elected officials. So he talks about that, and he says that whites control all of the institutions within Black neighborhoods. They derive the benefits of authority, income, jobs, and business opportunities from governing in both white and Black communities. All right. And so he ends with, under this system of white domination, he says Black elected officials' political power is mostly symbolic. And he says that without tangible resources and power, it is nearly impossible for the properly intentioned Black elected official or Black community to compete. So, we may have Black elected officials in these different communities, but they don't have any power. So they may be the congressman and the senator and stuff, but they don't have the power. And the reason why they don't have the power is because they don't control the resources. Wow. So they don't really have the power. They just don't have it. And then I wanted to add too, sis, that a lot of them are corrupt. I'm thinking about Baltimore City right now. And our mayor, she just got sentenced. Well, our ex-mayor, her name was Catherine Pugh. She just got sentenced to 3 years with the feds for taking some money, a couple $100,000. Wow. And so, and then there has been other politicians, Black politicians, who scammed us out of money. The state gave put millions of dollars into Baltimore for development, but it never trickled down to any of us because the Black elected officials stole the money. So I don't want to act like they just don't have anything. It's some corruption that we're dealing with also.
Correct.
Yeah.
Go ahead, brother.
Tyrone said I got to speak on that. Go ahead, brother Tyrone.
Brother.
Yeah. I don't think we understand that we cannot do what they do. We are not in that situation, that position, where we can afford to do the wicked things that they do. No. You know what I'm saying? So they're thinking just about themselves. How can they get in a higher position? How can I get over on people? You gotta get over that, because even if you do think like that, you will not get away. You can't. I don't know what to think about that, or what else to say, but I don't know,
No,
man.
I agree. Like you said, we can't do what they do because they're corrupt too, you know. But we try to move like they move, and then we end up getting jammed up. And it was actually two mayors in Baltimore. You had Sheila Dixon, she got caught up, and then right after her, we had another mayor, Kathleen Pugh. She just got caught up. So, like you said, we can't do what they do. You know,
At all.
we can't do what they do. But a lot of them don't have power. And it says right here, he says, in the case of Black elected officials, they are restricted from assisting the Black community because they do not control public and private resources. Like you said, they don't control anything. They don't control anything. They don't have any power. But let's go ahead and summarize nationalism and pluralism.
Okay, so he says that nationalism helps groups build communities, mobilize for power, and control resources. It allows cultural groups to function as nations within nations. Black Americans are a nation within a nation, but have never behaved in a manner consistent with this reality. He said nationalism is based upon a sense of community and to make it easier for Blacks to build a cohesive group within the nation. And this is true. You know, we talk about this all the time, that we need to establish some type of nationality away from them, something that identifies Black people specifically in this country, because African American ain't good enough, because African American has so many oppressive negative ties attached to it that we would need to try to separate away from that and establish some type of nation. And this is what Baba is talking about. And then he goes on 78 to start talking about ethnic enclaves and Black nationalism. And he's talking about how immigrants, when they come here, he says typically the first generation, they stay and they build the wealth and they get things together in their own communities before maybe the second generation might assimilate or something like that into the larger society. But however, they still maintain their communities. You feel me? That is the key that we lost into, Queen. So it's like, even if some of us decided that, okay, maybe we want to integrate a little bit and let's just play the field and see how it's going to be, we still should have kept what we had.
Yes.
That was where we went wrong. It wasn't necessarily with the curiosity and wanting to integrate. It's that some of y'all should have went left and then the other one y'all should have stayed where it was right at.
Right.
That was the problem.
Right. Yep.
And this is basically what he's explaining. This is the paradigm in which they have in this country and how they operate. So even if you might see them out and about, it's some type of community they affiliated with that they can always go back if they feel that they don't want to be out here with us no more.
And we don't have that.
We don't have that.
We don't have that. We can't say, okay, I'm gonna go back to the Black community. And
right.
We don't have any place to go back to. Yeah, because we totally integrated. So we don't have any place to go. We don't have a Black community to go back to. Now we can go back to the Black neighborhoods, right? Where the Asians control, you know, the Asians and the Arabs control everything. And Asian, Arabs, and Indians, because, you know, you have the Indians who control the 7-Elevens where I live at. You have the Indians, they control the 7-Elevens. The Arabs control the gas station. And then the Asians control the liquor store, nail shops, and beauty supply store and dry cleaners. So you can go back to these Black neighborhoods that are powerless, but we can't run back to a Black community.
Talk about it.
Yeah, we can't.
Big difference.
Yeah, and then so at the bottom where he talks about aggregation in urban cities, he was saying that, you know, a great competitive advantage for Black Americans is the fact, you know, that it is currently sits on some of the most valuable and best located real estate, right? The inner cities.
Talk about it.
So he's saying that we have cities, and so we could practice ethno aggregation and vertical integration, all of these paradigms that he's talking about, and how we can convert these areas into Black business communities, right?
That's right.
He's saying that we can do that.
That's right.
But that's not what we did. You know, we end up abandoning them. But he's saying that because we're sitting on prime real estate, like for example, in Baltimore City, we have the Inner Harbor, which is a huge attraction, Sister Alima. So can you imagine if the Black folks in the city build business districts or around the harbor, how much money that would generate? So he's saying that Black people who are living in, you know, these cities like Detroit and Inglewood and Atlanta and New Orleans and Baltimore and Jacksonville, Florida and Philadelphia, he's saying, look, you guys are sitting on prime real estate and how we could build economic engines if we aggregated our resources to build businesses and industries. But since at the bottom of page 80, I looked at this table. So he has a table entitled Prime Urban Cities for Building a National Economic Network. And so he lists he lists Black majority cities and Black minority cities. And I was just thinking that since gentrification came about, a lot of these numbers are different. For example, Washington, D.C., we used to call that the chocolate city. And at the time that this book was published, it said that DC had a population of Black people. I think we were 77% of the population, and we had $5.8 billion income just in Washington, DC alone. But I did a quick Google search, sis, and I found out that that number has now dropped to 49%.
Whoa.
Yes, from 49% African American and 43% white
Wow.
in DC now. And I know Baltimore, we're still predominantly Black, but that number is 60%. I think we're actually up to 62%.
Oh, I think Atlanta, I know Atlanta is still Black. New Orleans is still Black.
Mhm.
Jacksonville, Florida, you know that's still Black.
Oh yeah, definitely there. Yeah, definitely there. But
I
I
don't
know
know about Norfolk, Virginia, though, because the last few times I went, I don't know.
yeah, Norfolk, I heard. Yeah, my aunt travels out there a lot, and she was telling me that it's a lot of white folks out there and a lot of interracial couples, she said.
Yes, so many. When I was a kid, my grandfather, my mother is from Virginia. She's from Norfolk. I don't remember seeing all of them out there, sis. When I was a kid, it was heavy Black.
Yeah, but now, like you said, you see a lot of it out there now. And so look at the top of page 81, because I know, Queen, you got to get ready to go.
No, I'm good. Let's go. Let's roll.
Okay. So at the top of page 81, he says that, we can also transform suburban neighborhoods into viable, self-sufficient Black communities. So he's saying we can do it in the city. We can also do this in the suburbs. All right. And then he gives an example, Prince George's County in Maryland. It says that and I know exactly, I'm like 45 minutes away from this county.
I remember you telling me about this, Queen.
Yeah, he said the honor of being the wealthiest Black neighborhood in America. It's a suburb in Washington, D.C. He says, but yet, he said it's still, even though these people are highly educated, and I'm talking about Prince George's County in Maryland. So even though they're highly educated and they're wealthy, right? He said that it's still a Black neighborhood. And he's right, it's still a residential area. He said they did not build a community that is self-sufficient and competitive economically. So even though there's a high concentration of Black educated people there and Black folks there who have a lot of money, and I think the median income in Prince George's County right now is like $85,000. So like the average person in Prince George's County makes at least 85 G's a year, but they still haven't built a community, right, that's self-sufficient and competitive economically. So yeah. So then he moves on to talk about rebuilding and how rebuilding can begin by staking out competitive space. And that's what you were talking about earlier, Queen, like, where's this space? Right. We first need space. Where are we going to build this? And I remember during a previous conversation, you raised the question, you said, should we even be building it here? Like, should we be building it here, or should we be in Africa somewhere, creating these communities that we're talking about? So I know that was a question that you had posed to the group. I believe that was during chapter 1 when you posed that question. But definitely we need a space. He says a competitive space on which to build and operate. So that's the first thing he talked about. And then he talks about a boundary maintenance, how like once we get the space, how we need to create and mark our territory. There needs to be a boundary. So he was saying, okay, when you go to Chinatown, you're in Chinatown because you see the writing on the wall.
That's right.
You see people speaking their language. They just speak, they're out practicing their culture. So when you're in Chinatown, when you're in Little Italy, know. So he's saying when we create this space, that it needs to be marked by something, language, culture, skin color, something, religion, So he talks about that.
I agree.
I'm trying to think what else, Queen, because I see we're coming to the end.
Yeah, I know he just goes on to talk about language and that it's a part of culture, as we already know, and that's a unifying element. But of course, we cannot use that. So he's saying since we don't have that, we'd have to use different type of language markers, and he started to talk about the Ebonics and how we used to have that. But he said that the interesting thing about that is the uppity blacks, they were the ones that had the issue with them pushing for the usage of Ebonics. So it really wasn't the white people, it was them. So not surprising to that element.
Yeah, I'm not surprised either.
Not surprised at all, Queen. Yeah, so and then he on 86 he starts to talk about the levels of a functional community.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that once we've put together the other elements for a functional community, an independence economy, the code of conduct, the form of government, our team now has a foundation from which to compete politically and economically. He says our paradigm of vertical integration can be applied to the community development. Vertical community development establishes a common sense of direction, authority, and collective interest. Members of the community live by a code of conduct based upon principles that dictate how they relate to, care for, respect, and support each other. And then he has a little bitty flow chart here. He said functional community. In order to have a functional community, you got to have group trust, you got to have group cooperation, and of course, at the top, you've got to have group accountability.
And that sis, you and I talk about that all the time. People don't want to be held accountable.
Right.
Yeah, how there's no accountability. People just kind of want to say and do whatever they want to do, you know, and that's we got to stop that. But, you know, I guess when we develop a sense of community, then you'll operate for the greater good of your family and for the community, you know, once we rid ourselves of that me, that disease of individualism, you know, but definitely. So functional community, yeah, that'll build group trust, that will build group cooperation, and that will in turn build group accountability. So since we hit the hammer, I mean, I think that this was a cool chapter. I think it was a cool chapter. I think Baba Claud definitely hit on a lot of stuff. He talks about notorious manumission all the time, but yeah, he touched on a lot of things. And you know, again, if only we applied these things, where would we be, right? If we applied these things. But do you have any closing words, Queen?
I do not. I enjoyed the chapter as well. Look forward to kicking it off into chapter 4. We're going to start talking about Dr. Maat's favorite, reconstructing schools.
Yes, Queen.
Yes. We're going to have to try to keep Dr. Maat on the leash next week. She will talk up. She can get in on this because, you know, she's an educator, so that she's very passionate about this. But I know that this is going to be very good because we always talk about, Queen, in order to establish any of these things, it starts with the education. So I look forward to this.
And look, I don't even have anything to say because you already knew I was excited about this. I said, finally, okay, restructuring schools for group competitiveness. Yes. So I'm looking forward to this section, Queen, because like you said, this is right up my alley. I've been talking about this for years, how we need a curriculum, you know, that will cultivate the necessary mentality and skills for our children to operate in our best interest. Because right now we're not. We have a curriculum that makes our children extremely Eurocentric. Yes. And so they're operating with a European, you know, centered worldview, which is basically anti-African. Yes. That's how they're operating. Their behavior is anti-African, and that's because they're operating with a European worldview because of the curriculum that we currently have in the public food system. So anyway, sis, I'm looking forward to this discussion. Brother Tyrone, do you have any last words, brother, before we close out?
Thank you, but no, I don't at this time. I do appreciate the chat and, you know, bringing me on.
Okay, cool. And family, please share this video.
Share the video.
Yeah, share the video. You know, I want to look in the chat room and see hundreds of folks, you know, talking. But you know what, sis? I would want to see it, but the reality is no drama here.
That's right.
Yeah, it's no drama. We're talking about economically, politically, and socially empowering ourselves. And, you know, that's just not what people talk about. That's, you know, right. if it's a debate going on, or, you know, it's some gossip going on, or someone's trying to expose somebody, you have 1,000 people in the chat and sharing the video and going back and forth. But we're talking about, you know, blueprint for Black power, Powernomics, falsification of African consciousness, the African personality in America. We having conversations around books like that, and it's just not popular. So the reality is we may not have that 1,000, but definitely still share the video spread the word about the Resurgence of the African Mind book club, like the video family, and join us again next week at our regular scheduled time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The only reason, family, why we had to do it earlier today, I have an engagement to go to at 6:30, and so we had to get it in a little earlier, but we'll be back next week,
Also,
7 p.m.
wanted to continue, Dr. Maat. We didn't want to cancel. It was important to us to, try not to have to reschedule it. So we said, let's just do it early.
Yes, absolutely. So family, meet us back here next week, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have a wonderful and productive week. Peace and love.
Odabo.
Peace out.